And welcome back to Coup Save America. My name is Sean Sainhart, and I am your host. Do me a favor, if you're watching this live, please go ahead and like the stream. Go ahead and share it. And if you happen to be listening to this on podcast format, please go ahead and leave a review. Today, we're going to be diving into the career of Kamala Harris, a figure who's often labeled herself as a progressive prosecutor. However, her actions tell a bit of a different story. One filled with contradictions, controversies, and a track record that suggests she contributed significantly to the injustices that she decries. Let's start with her tenure as San Francisco District Attorney from 2004 to 2011. Harris gained a reputation for being tough on crime, implementing policies and actions that revealed a troubling pattern. She supported the controversial three strikes law, which mandated life sentences for those convicted of 3 felonies. This policy led to an overpopulated prison system, which, as we discussed last week, disproportionately affected communities of color. During her time as district attorney, the felony conviction rate rose from 52% in 2003 to 67% in 2006. This increase was often achieved through practices that many argue were ethically questionable and unfairly impacted marginalized communities. Moving on to her time as California Attorney General from 2011 to 2017, Harris's record becomes even more contentious. When she accepted office, the new AG inherited a big problem. The state's prison system had become increasingly overcrowded to the point that, in 2009, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the conditions violated the prisoner's constitutional rights. For example, extreme cases of abuse, including 54 inmates sharing a single toilet. Medical systems so overstretched that a preventable death occurred every few days. And suicidal patients locked into cages shaped like telephone booths because it was the least resource-heavy way to keep them from killing themselves. The Supreme Court decreed that California needed to take emergency action to identify and release enough nonviolent inmates to bring the prison population down from 200% over design capacity to a mere 137.5% overcrowded. This reduction in inmate population was ordered to take place over a period of 2 years, with targeted release deadlines every 6 months beginning in 2011, just after Kamala Harris took office. Not only did Harris fail to comply with the first prisoner release deadline, but her office aggressively fought the ruling in court, dragging their feet for years while inmates due to be released languished in horrific conditions. The Atlantic reported that Harris's, quote, court filings are largely void of dispositive facts and unworthy of a first-year associate, much less the chief lawyer of our nation's most populous state, end quote. The magazine article suggested that Harris's behavior may have even put her in breach of California's legal and ethical standards, which forbid filing a motion for an improper purpose, such as to harass or cause unnecessary delay. Despite this, Harris's actions went largely unnoticed until 2014, during her brief presidential run. As investigations on the mudslinging began, a memo surfaced in which lawyers from her office admitted that the real motive behind opposing the release of prisoners they had successfully kept incarcerated until earlier that year, well beyond the original deadline, was because the state could not afford to lose the free labor from the firefighting camps where nonviolent prisoners were being housed. Harris, of course, denied the validity of this accusation, but the words in the memo mimicked the arguments her office had been putting forth during the preceding battles in court. And as you'll hear throughout the next few minutes, Kamala Harris was hardly a friend of social justice when it came to arrest, lawmaking, and the judicial system in general. One striking example is her involvement in the jail informant scandal in Orange County. For years, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, in collaboration with the Orange County District Attorney's Office, planted informants in jail to elicit confessions illegally. This practice violated the Sixth Amendment rights of many defendants. In the 2016 case of People versus DeCurry, an informant had illegally obtained statements from the defendant. The judge found that the OCDA had a conflict of interest due to its involvement in the informant program and recused the entire office from the case. Instead of supporting this decision to ensure justice, Harris, then the Attorney General for California, appealed the judge's ruling, opposing the recusal despite the clear evidence of misconduct. The Court of Appeal upheld the judge's decision, rebuking Harris for her stance and emphasizing that the judge's ruling was based on extensive evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. And this was not an isolated incident. In the 2015 case of People v. Velasco Palacios, a prosecutor deliberately altered an interrogation transcript to falsely include a confession, aiming to secure a life sentence. The trial judge dismissed the case, calling the prosecutor's actions egregious, outrageous, and shocking to the conscience. Excuse me there. Harris's office appealed this dismissal, minimizing the gravity of the misconduct. The Court of Appeal upheld the dismissal, reaffirming that such government misconduct warranted the case's dismissal. Once again, Harris was seen defending prosecutorial misconduct rather than seeking justice. Harris's resistance to criminal justice reforms extends even further. In 2014, Harris chose not to take a position on Proposition 47, a California ballot initiative that aimed to reduce certain low-level felonies to misdemeanors. Despite its approval by voters, Harris remained silent. That same year, she laughed off a reporter's question about supporting the legalization of marijuana for recreational use. It wasn't until 2018, long after public opinion had shifted, that she finally reversed her stance. During her tenure as Attorney General, the California Department of Justice under Harris obtained over 1,500 convictions for marijuana offenses in 2011 alone, an enforcement level higher than any of her predecessors. This is despite her recent advocacy for marijuana legalization. Then, in 2015, Harris opposed legislation that would have required the Attorney General's office to independently investigate police shootings resulting in death. Such legislation was crucial for ensuring accountability and transparency, especially in the wake of numerous high-profile police killings of unarmed individuals, many of whom were people of color. She also refused to support statewide standards for the use of body-worn cameras by police officers. Now, this resistance drew sharp criticism from various reformers, including Democratic state senators, the ACLU, and San Francisco's elected public defender. Activist Felicia Jones, a longtime supporter, questioned, quote, how many more people need to die before she steps in, end quote. But Harris's record on wrongful convictions is perhaps the most troubling. Take the case of George Cage, an electrician with no criminal record, charged in 1999 with sexually abusing his stepdaughter based primarily on her testimony. Gage was convicted, but later it was revealed that the prosecutor had withheld exculpatory evidence, including medical reports and testimony from the stepdaughter's mother, who described her as, quote, a pathological liar, end quote. When Gage's case reached the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in 2015, Harris's prosecutors defended the conviction, citing procedural technicalities. Despite the appellate judge's clear signal to reconsider, Harris refused to dismiss the case, resulting in Cage continuing to serve a 70-year sentence. Sadly, this again is not an isolated incident. Harris fought to keep Daniel Larson in prison on a 28-year-to-life sentence for possession of a concealed weapon, despite evidence of his innocence and his lawyer's incompetence. Harris's argument? Larson had not raised his legal arguments in a timely manner. Eventually, she lost this case. Then there's Johnny Baca, convicted of murder with the help of false testimony presented by the prosecutor. Harris's office defended his conviction until a video of the oral argument brought national embarrassment, forcing her to relent. And we can't, of course, forget Kevin Cooper, a death row inmate whose trial was marred by racism and corruption. Cooper sought advanced DNA testing to prove his innocence, but Harris opposed it. It wasn't until a New York Times expose went viral that she reversed her position. Harris's actions reveal a pattern of using legal technicalities to uphold wrongful convictions rather than seeking justice. She had the power to correct these miscarriages of justice, but chose not to. In a New York Times article, University of San Francisco School of Law professor Laura Bazelon highlighted Harris's consistent resistance to criminal justice reforms. Fazlullah noted that Harris often fought to uphold wrongful convictions secured through official misconduct, including evidence tampering, false testimony, and the suppression of crucial information. Friends, this is far from the image of a progressive prosecutor that Harris has tried to project herself. And let's not overlook her stance on the death penalty. In 2014, a federal judge ruled that California's death penalty system was so dysfunctional that it violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Instead of supporting this decision and pushing for the abolition of the death penalty, Harris appealed the ruling, ensuring that the broken system remained in place. Kamala Harris's stance on immigration is equally troubling. She supported reporting arrested undocumented juveniles to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a policy that could lead to the deportation of vulnerable individuals. She also covered for corrupt police lab technicians and blocked gender confirmation surgery for a transgender prisoner, actions that drew significant criticism and legal challenges. A U.S. District Court judge ruled that withholding the surgery constituted cruel and unusual punishment in violation of, once again, the Eighth Amendment. Kamala Harris seems to really hate that Eighth Amendment. Another of Harris's notable and controversial actions was her handling of the foreclosure crisis and her connection to Steve Mnuchin. The so-called foreclosure king, Steve Mnuchin, who became Trump's Treasury Secretary, was CEO of One West Bank from 2009 to 2015. Under his leadership, the bank engaged in practices that rushed homeowners out of their homes through illegal and unethical means. Despite a detailed investigation by her office uncovering widespread misconduct by One West Bank, Harris declined to prosecute. This decision raised eyebrows, especially when Steve Mnuchin later donated to her Senate campaign, his only donation to a Democratic candidate. Look, while it would be groundbreaking to see a woman of color take the White House, I think it's important to find an American icon who genuinely deserves to be there. Throughout her career, Harris has supported policies that disproportionately harm communities of color. She favored criminalizing truancy, which often led to the prosecution of parents in low-income communities. She supported raising cash bail fees, a practice that keeps economically disadvantaged individuals in jail simply because they cannot afford to buy their way out. And when it comes to prison labor, the modern form of slavery, we must not forget that a disproportionate number of those prisoners who Harris kept locked up for cheap labor were citizens of color. In her memoir, The Truths We Hold, Harris writes about the dark history of prosecutors as instruments of injustice, claiming to understand this history quite well. She, for instance, acknowledges the framing of innocent men, charges brought without sufficient evidence, and prosecutors hiding exculpatory evidence. Yet her record as district attorney and later as attorney general shows that she often perpetuated the very injustices she claims to oppose. Kamala Harris's career as a public servant is marked by a series of decisions and actions that contradict her self-proclaimed progressive stance. From defending prosecutorial misconduct to resisting criminal justice reforms, her record reveals a pattern of prioritizing convictions over justice. As we continue to examine the roles of our leaders, it's crucial to hold them accountable for their actions and ensure they truly represent the progressive values they claim to uphold. Politicians quite often make concessions to gain support, but Harris's career shows a consistent alignment with law and order agendas without apparent barter or trade. Despite some progressive actions, like refusing the death penalty in a police officer's murder case and starting a program for first-time nonviolent offenders, her overall record still remains deeply troubling. Harris needs to break radically from her past if she wants the support of those who care about dismantling mass incarceration and correcting injustices. A good first step would be to apologize to the wrongfully convicted individuals she fought to keep in prison and ensure they get the justice they deserve, starting with George Gage. And that, my dear friends, is the final word up front. Stay tuned to future broadcasts of Coup Save America as we continue to uncover the truths behind political figures and their real impact on our justice system. In today's episode, I am honored to continue this conversation of equality and how we can build a nation that strives to uphold and uplift all of our citizens. You might remember last Tuesday we Heard from journalist Paulo Lehman Ewing on the importance of amplifying the voices of those who are most affected by racial disparities. And today we are joined by another champion of valuing others and working together to reclaim our lost humanity. Jesse J.D. Mass is a psychologist, a fellow podcaster, and author of the book Race for What? And let me tell you, friends, this is going to be a real treat today. I had the pleasure of reading this book twice, actually, and it has 7 innovative ways that we can combat race in today's society. And JD will join us right after the break. And JD Mass joins us right now. JD, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, oops. There we go. We'll get this right here eventually. There we go.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No.
So before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we are 2 white men talking about a very delicate and sensitive issue in America, race. Now, the reason I mentioned this to start with is because I want to get to the first part of your book, where you talk about your experience growing up in a black community around black culture. And so before we begin our conversation on the steps that we need to take to reduce racism, I was hoping that maybe you would share your story a little bit to kind of let our audience know where you come from.
Sure. First and foremost, I love the platform, and I appreciate it. Should I put headphones on?
Oh, I'm not hearing any echo, but if you want to go ahead and put headphones on, that's fine too.
I'm hearing it on mine. Don't hear it.
Oh, is there an echo?
Yeah, I'm also hearing an echo.
Oh, okay. And let's see. While we're waiting, I want to go ahead and put up the book cover. Race for What? We're having some technical issues today. Can we put the book cover back up, please? Race for What? A white man's journey and guide to healing racism from within. And again, we've got J.D. Mass, who's a doctorate of psychology, organizational psychology, I believe, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin with your story.
So my parents raised me. Well, I was born in Philadelphia,
Okay.
and then at 4 years old, my parents moved back to St. Louis where they grew up. And they purposely wanted to raise me around in black community to learn to be anti-racist, or really just learn to be not racist at a time and in a culture that naturally teaches us to be racist, right? And so they made an intentional decision, and throughout my life were intentional how they raised us, how they welcomed my friends in, and what they taught us about society, so we could see things differently than what we were learning from school, media, and whatnot. And that was important for me, setting me on the journey, especially when I went into my friend's home, I felt a welcoming that I had not felt in other parts of my family. Even when I would go to my grandparents' house, often I had to behave a certain way. When I went to my friend's house, I got to be me. Sometimes it was a little overbearing for me in the beginning because I was sorry. There's a lot of feedback, but let me just take these off.
Is this any better?
It's not better, but I don't have to hear it as loud.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, I don't know if it's my end or your end. But I grew up really loving how I was welcomed into the black household. Right, my best friends were next door to where we moved when I was 4 years old, and it was grandmother, it was mother, it was what am I trying to say? Aunts, uncles, cousins, all living under one roof. And I got to be, welcomed into that. And I got made fun of. I had to develop tough skin, all sorts of things that built my character. But I also got to be me. And the more I was me, the more I was a shy kid at times, the more I was just felt like a sense of confidence, right? The more I was pushed to challenge my fears and all of these things, there was just a level of welcoming that I appreciated. And I got to see that in my own home between my parents and my friends. When they came over, first time you might get served, here's some food. Second time you come over, there's the kitchen, go get it yourself, and you're a part of the household. And seeing that and having my friends experience that often for the first time within a white household was also great to see and experience for us growing up. So that's really the beauty that led me to be inspired to want to do well and do right and uplift and fight for justice and whatnot. And that was kind of my inspiration at the root level.
You talk in the book too about experiencing racism from within your own family.
Yeah. So from my grandfather's standpoint, and he was a very dominant figure on my dad's side of the family, he would have these conversations with me. Like, on one hand, he fought for equal pay for Black folks to be paid, especially in construction work. On the other hand, he didn't like me having so many Black friends. He didn't like when I studied African history in college. He was very bothered by me dating a Black woman, but it was also all very much in a pro-Jewish way. When I went even further out, I had distant cousins that disowned their daughter for marrying an Asian man. Like,
really?
So it was built into the cake, and I really got to see. It was amazing sometimes to see how much, when my cousins came in town, my friends encouraged me to invite them to come hang out with us, and in doing so, the elders would say, wow, you're just so inviting, or you're so sharing, or you're the life of the party, or whatnot. And your sisters love you. And my friends also encouraged me to make sure that, I was a good older brother, that I, invited them in and made sure that, I took pride in being an older brother. And that wasn't done in the same way in my family. And so from that, you just got to see, like, there would be these preconceptions about they didn't like the way my parents raised us, but they definitely loved the way their children felt around me. And so it was a very interesting conversations constantly going on with that.
What do you think was it about your parents that sort of broke away from that manner of thinking to be very progressive in how they raised you?
I think both of my grandmothers were very influential on them, because both of them were very curious grandmothers, very non-judgmental as we define it in our society. But my dad, I couldn't quite get the why out of him. All I know is that he fought. He went to an Ivy League education, but he organized and fought for certain level of justice and equality and equity in those systems. And as an attorney, he would do so. He actually would he fought against police killings way before there was the cameras, and
Right.
often lost because the jury would often side with the police at that time. But this was deeply enrooted in him, and I've asked him why several times, and he just would explain the what more than the why. From my mother, she wrote a story when she was in high school. Her twin brother was killed in an accident. He was riding his bike and killed by a driver. And when she grew up in a wealthy enough family where she had a housekeeper and a gardener, and they were, to the children, they were definitely part of the family. And when her brother died, the housekeeper and brother and gardener were still coming in the back door, and she witnessed her father recognize how much this death impacted these two people that weren't even allowed to come through the front door, and yet the people
Right.
coming through the front door were just friends and colleagues, and they were not impacted in the same way. And he said from that moment he never wanted them to feel like they had to come in the back door again. And that, witnessing that at a young age, she was 15 years old, really changed her perspective on that and made her want to be a part of that as well.
Where do you talk a lot about in the book, and there's so much that I want to get to from the book. I don't even know if we'll have enough time to do all of that. I did a lot of highlighting in part two. Part one I read, and really part one of the book is a memoir of sorts,
Yeah.
a biographical
Yeah.
depiction of your life, which I was kind of, when I first started reading the book, I was like, I wonder where this is going, because I was like, this is supposed to be about solutions.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got to the second part of the book that I realized how important the first part really was to the story.
Yes.
And so the point is I read the first part of the book, and I read your book twice. And I probably will give it another read, because there's so much to digest in there that it's really hard to take it all in at the first time. But I'm wondering, you talk a lot about spirituality along your journey as well, especially the Koi, I believe it's called.
Kingdom of Yah, the KOY, yes.
Now, how did that, you talked about going over to an experience in Israel.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. So to get to that, to bridge to that, Nelly, the musical artist, was a childhood best friend of mine, and he's on the book cover, kneeling next to me. And his career took off around the same time I was coming out of college, and I was already entrepreneurial, and he wanted to do some entrepreneurial things, and I got involved in his career. His uncle was part of the Kingdom of Yah, a group of African Americans that left in the 60s and went back through Africa, traced themselves back to the land of Israel, and went in the 60s while Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were doing their thing here, went and set up shop and set up a community in Israel, upon the laws of return initially, until 1 year later, those laws of return were changed so that you had to be born of a Jewish mother. But the state of Israel actually named their area the Village of Peace. And it's because they gave up a diet that included killing animals. They built their community around sort of the village to raise a child, but all things in common is what they called it, where it was just a sharing community. And so I actually was changing my diet at the time, and I met a group that ran a restaurant in St. Louis, of a vegan restaurant, and I would go there often, not even recognizing the connection to this. But then Nelly's uncle came in town, and he and I started talking, and he invited me to Israel. Well, at the time, I didn't really care about world politics. I was not listening to what was going on in the world. I just knew my dad was very anti what was going on in Israel. And he would have arguments with his father about the treatment of the Palestinians for years. And so he didn't want to go to Israel until there was peace in the Middle East, as he would say. Well, after I left working with Nelly and I was kind of down and out, my grandmother called me and asked me if I wanted to go to Israel. And I said, sure, if you're not afraid, I'm not afraid. Let's figure this out. So I called up Amikam, Nelly's uncle, and I said to him, I'm coming to Israel for 12 days. I would really like to, see what's going on. He says, oh, you have to spend 3 of those days in the community. So I went back to my grandmother. I said, I got to spend 3 days in the community. And she said, oh, absolutely not. We are only there for 12 days. There's no way we have time to go down to this community. I said, okay, well, I can't go halfway across the world and not go visit this community. So we have to work something out. Well, she's a negotiator by trade. And so we ended up negotiating, and I got a half a day when her friends went to the Dead Sea, or what the community Kingdom of Yah calls the Sea of Life. We went down to the community, and I got to see a level of humanity practiced there. And granted, they knew we were coming, so to some extent, right, they're on their best behavior. But to another extent, I don't see that happening, what I experienced happening here, and I'll explain. We got there, we had a meal, we started learning from one of the leaders of the community, a prince, and he started to take us around on a tour of the community. And it's single-story housing, rows of it, and there's inside of the housing, there's rooms where people gather, there's an event space, there's a cafeteria, there's other little stores. And as we're walking through, I have to use the restroom. And he says, well, since you have to go, just go in any door you see and go use the restroom. Well, these are people's homes. I'm not going in anybody's door and using the restroom. That sounds ridiculous. So I keep walking. And he says, hey, didn't you say you have to go? Go up that door and open it and go in and use the restroom. And I said, okay. And I went to it and I went up to knock. And before I could get my knock out, he said, hey, I didn't say knock. Open the door. We haven't locked our doors in 40 years, and use the restroom. And so I peek my head in and I hear a Black woman's voice. Hey, baby, what you need? Some water, some food? Want to use the restroom? Yes, the restroom. I'll take some water. I'm very timid at this moment. And I go in, use the restroom, get some water, and we keep going. A few minutes later, a small child runs around the corner, and he goes, are you going to the park? And I mean, this child had to be 2 to 3 years old tops. And you just hear the googly gaggly, and then she keeps running. And my grandmother and I, head on a swivel, going, what is going on here? And he says, don't worry. There's more eyes on her than you know. Everyone knows whose child that is. And we teach them that the entire village, as soon as they're old enough to walk, the entire village is their home. And I thought, oh man, that is so different that I had never experienced before. So I came back charged up, ready to help. And there happened to be a part of this community. They had extensions, they called them. And I was living in LA. There happened to be an extension in Los Angeles. And I remember going and meeting them and being excited. And the gentleman who ran it and I were, immediately connected philosophically and intellectually. And then I came and I said, okay, so here's what I would love to do for you guys, because I see these business opportunities. You guys make this great food. I want to, do it this way. And he basically said, stop. You're going to show that you're going to do it our way. We built this. You got involved after seeing the results. You don't know what goes into creating this level of peace. You need to take a step back and just do as you're told for a little while. Help earn our trust first and foremost. And you get to learn what the intentions going into this means. And that was a very important step for me to take.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because you talk also in the book about yourself falling victim to this white savior syndrome, and you fell into that in Los Angeles a bit too. Mm-hmm. And when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, he's trying to help his, I didn't recognize what you were getting at. And why is it that we fall so easily into that trap of being the white savior? Here, let's define what white savior is in your definition.
So to me, white savior is still a form of white supremacy, because we feel like we have the understanding of how something works, and we're going to guide somebody, if not do something for somebody, in order to improve their life without even really getting an understanding of what they need, what's important to them, how they operate. Nope, I got it. I figured it out. I see the problem. I'm going to come in and work my magic, so to speak. Right. And sometimes it's from a place of guilt. It's often from a place of good-heartedness, but sometimes it's also from a self-serving standpoint. And I got the answers, and I know what's best, and I'm doing this.
I want to go back to Koi for a moment and your experience in LA, because I'm fascinated by the hunter-gatherer societies. And what you described in Israel sounds very similar to a hunter-gatherer society, which is very agrarian, very, very much a village working together in a very peaceful way for subsistence. And you make a connection in your book to this several times, where you talk about our capitalistic society.
Yeah.
Is premised on white supremacy. And I was wondering if you could explain that position.
Okay, so taking some steps back, step one in the book is about understanding, well, even prior to step one, I talk about the deceptive practices, right? And I think many of us acknowledge that, whether we believe in conspiracy theories to whatever understanding, there's a level of lack of truth that goes on throughout our society, in advertisements and the way we're taught, right? The things that we're not taught about, all of these things. So in understanding that,
you even make the connection that language itself, the English language, is deceptive and based on white supremacy.
For sure. So when I was with the Kingdom of Yah, the movie The Prestige came out. And I don't know if you recall this movie coming out. It was like 2008, 2006, somewhere in that range. And it was Hugh Jackman, and he was a magician, and he was the main character, and it was about, him as a magician. And everybody in the kingdom was like, what does a magician have to do with this title, prestige? And we looked up the root word. The root definition of prestige is conjuring tricks and illusions. And all of a sudden now it makes sense. When you even look at the definition today, it talks about valuing something and holding in high regards, but it's based on a perception that it's more valuable, right?
Right.
And so when I said, okay, in a magic show, it's not what you see that tricks you. It's what you don't see. In the way that we're taught, it's not what we're taught that tricks us as much as we're not taught about any other cultures, right? We don't get to learn about any cultures other than we get world history when we're in the 10th grade. And that's really just about our world, which is a social construct from a European perspective. This war happened, and that war happened, and that war happened, and that war happened, and these became rulers. That is our understanding. So there's so much more that we haven't learned. So step one was don't take a step. And that's important in so the question then becomes why. And to go back real quick to your use of language thing, one of the things that I really loved when I was taught in the kingdom was they say spelling because we're under a spell. They say cursive because we're under a curse. There's conversation and con this and con that because we're being conned, right? Translation because we're under a trans.
Right.
There's so much of the way we communicate that even uses deception in the way we describe how we communicate, that it's like in front of our face and we can't even see it. So because of that, we never really understand why. Why did we start this whole culture of white supremacy? What made us start a culture that said there's a race? Right. And so I started to talk to folks that have studied history from a different perspective than what we learned. And we talked about the lack of resources where you find less melanated people occupying those lands. And I think it's important for us because part of the prestige is we call ourselves white. And that sounds like we've been painted something. Instead of having less of pigmentation that's important in the life cycle of the universe and of the planet that allows us to be outside in the sun. It is much more difficult for me to be outside in the sun for the length of time than my friends. They are able to absorb the sun. I am getting burnt up without the help of some kind of chemicals or other resources to help me.
I just went on vacation a few weeks ago and actually got sunburned from being in the sun for less than a day. So I hear what you're saying.
Yet, if we're going to say that not being able to be outside for as long as other people makes us superior, then we have to be deceptive in all that we do to build systems that show that we're superior. So much so that, and it's most important in how we can raise our babies, not only from the perspective of the less melanated babies to believe that white superiority, but also to the melanated babies to believe that they are inferior. And that takes an real intentional harm to do so. So the question goes back to, again, why? And when you're in a scarce place, right, where the resources, where there's less sun, there's less natural resources. Biologically, this is true. These are facts. We get all of our nutrition that our bodies need from the planet. So imagine we don't have this great opportunity to speak online. We don't have computers and cars and trains. We're 600 years ago. We are dealing with the fact that we don't have great access to the resources that our bodies need in order to be whole, which makes us, one, eat meat at a higher rate, because that's at least one way we're trying to get our resources, which has its own level of aggression and other kind of spiritual and psychological impacts. But because we're not whole, several things happen. We're less healthy. If you look at historically where some of the germs and diseases came from, that is how we conquered many lands, was through our germs and diseases that we brought. Two, you're in a scarcity, and I'm going to hold up, your audience can't see this, but I'm holding up a glass of water. And Sean, if you and I feel like this is the last of the water on the planet, this conversation is going to be a little less friendly, because every time I take a sip, you're going to recognize that's one sip you should have had, not realizing that just behind that wall back there, there's a faucet and there's plenty of water for everybody. But we don't know that, because where we are, there's less resources, and we have to go seeking resources from other places where there's an abundance. But that competitive nature, right? That moment that you feel like every sip of water I take is a sip you can't have, makes us develop a competition. And if you look at our entire economic structure says there is a scarcity of resources on the planet, and therefore everyone inside your industry is competitive to you for the control of those resources. This is basic information we get taught in Economics 101 in any university course, right? This is how we build our economic structures. In an abundance mentality, there's more than enough to share. Let's all just enjoy what the earth has given us, and let's get along. And what are we doing with this deceptive practices? What are we doing with trying to control these resources? Yeah. Now, that is where kind of the capitalistic approach comes. But the race approach comes from trying to dominate areas where these resources are great, and recognizing that there's a difference in us. And so Dr. Claude Anderson, who was part of the Obama administration, but much more to help with an economics situation, he has been a proponent of reparations and other economic justice for a long time. He talked about the true definition of racism was started from the race of these European colonies colonizing the rest of the world. And they were in a race to do so. And from that started this black race, white race. And as they decided that competitively they needed to kind of form an alliance when it was necessary. If you look at how much, I don't know if you've ever been in a cycle of, oh, I need something so much that you don't even recognize when somebody's offering it to you, right? You just snatch it and I needed this. Woo, thank goodness. And I feel like that's where we were. We need to go back and hug ourselves from 400 years ago and say, you know what, you're worthy of sharing in this. You don't have to go and take it. You don't have to be this bully that you've developed. Right? Because when a bully happens on a one-on-one basis at school, we're taught to go, something must be happening at that school, at that child's home that's causing them to bully someone else. We have to go back and give ourselves the love and say, hey, we're worthy. Even though we can't be outside as long, we're still worthy of all of the natural resources. And we could use our systems of distribution and manufacturing that we've developed and actually use them to share with everybody, not distribute and control, but just give access to, and us all enjoy some life on this planet.
Yeah. You mentioned Barack Obama, and I want to interject some politics here just to get your take on it. You sort of heard my monologue, and
I did.
I consider myself on the political left. Yeah. And I guess some people would say far left. I'm for Medicare for all, a Green New Deal. I'm for reparations. Yeah. I'm for, not defunding the police as conservatives fear it, but reallocating funds to services that actually go into, preventing crime.
And redefining what's their responsibilities.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've been a loyal Democrat my entire life, up until 2020, I think, is when I had the real problem. When I voted for Barack Obama, a part of that vote was a mandate to actually implement racial equality. And I understand that is an impossible task for someone that's going to be in office for 8 years.
Right.
But I expected some sort of headway. And other than being our first black president, a lot of what he did was symbolic. I didn't feel like he took the initiative to really go after that mandate.
Right.
And I realized how that would have looked.
Mm-hmm.
How conservatives would have made that look. Oh, look what he's doing. He's favoring black people because he's black. I get all of that, but that's going to happen anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to have those conversations. And so I guess what I'm leading up to is, from a political standpoint, it seems like we're screwed, because no matter who gets into office on the Democratic side, it doesn't seem like they're ever going to do enough to even go after the root causes of what we're talking about. And isn't our political system inherently white supremacist as well?
For sure. And so going back to this deception, right? You're probably too young. I'm 48 years old. When I was growing up, there was Saturday cartoons was a big thing. And there was this song that the Church of Latter-day Saints put together, this little advertisement. I write about it in the book, but it talks about this kid was going to go tell a lie so he could go somewhere for his parents. And these spooky guys answered the door and they said, when you tell one lie, it leads to another. So you tell two lies to cover each other. And it took you down this whole path of how you have to keep lying once you've told a lie, because you kind of got to stay in front of the truth, right? And so our system was designed based on this lie of white supremacy, and so much lying and whatnot. Yet you almost have to give them some credit.
Yeah.
Like, this was well done. Holy smokes, is it hard to have this type of conversation, Sean, that you and I are having, especially as two less melanated men, that to even have the level of conversation at this stake and get people to really let go of all of this, because that's the biggest threat. Isn't changing this system. It's certainly not protesting and fighting, because that's all we do is fight. We love to fight. We got all the tools to fight. It's really letting go of this system and building different community structures like you talk about. And that's a bigger threat. Why did Black Wall Street get bombed? It wasn't because they were building companies that were going to come and harm white Americans. It was because they weren't in need of being a part of this anymore. We couldn't benefit from their work labor anymore. Meanwhile, we're sitting here going, we're going to keep all of our resources. And they're saying, hey, we found out a way that we can just love and support each other. And so even since then, the mandate and mission, going back to COINTELPRO days of...
Oh, right. I wanted you to talk about that too.
So the counterintelligence program, I think it's pro is what it means. But COINTELPRO was started by the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, to identify the deepest threats to America. And they talked about the extremism of Ku Klux Klan, but the biggest threat was Black culture. And they identified that as saying we cannot have the rise of a Black Messiah. And these organizations like the Black Panthers are our deepest threat. But the Black Panthers were not this military come to get us people. They had guns to protect from this violent white culture that has guns. That was it. The rest of it was about, and I speak about this often, there's a big difference in the definition of Black power and white power, right? There is an inherent Black power is about showing love. It's about equity. It's about engaging all of us in fairness and justice. White power is about suppression. It's about harm. It like inherently has these factors in it. And so you got to give credit, though, as going back to how much intentional deception went into from the times of killing off Martin Luther King and other Black leaders, because the stopping of the rise of the Black Messiah, to how that morphed into creating hopelessness in Black communities, putting guns and drugs into them at a large rate, using that money to finance, we can get into that politics all day, finance wars elsewhere and all the things that were in the Reaganomics perspective. But creating this hopelessness and then adding these elements in order to make them look savage and violent. And again, we go back to scarcity. We created the scarcity in their communities of resources, of hope, of opportunities. And then we said, look at how violent they are. Well, that shows that's part of our culture. That's not a reflection of their culture. And that's very hard for us to untangle and really understand in this point.
Yeah. I mean, I changed my understanding of white supremacy from your book, because it's a much broader term and it's so manifest. And I mean, again, it's brilliant in the way that it was designed into the system that, hundreds and hundreds of years later, I would go back even further. But you understand the point.
Without a doubt. I would go back thousands of years.
Yeah.
To the first paintings of Jesus and
the white man.
Right, and Moses, and however we took these Hebraic teachings and started to make them into our own stories.
Yeah, and the white supremacy, I mean, we started out, the first humans were, of course, black.
Yeah.
And we forget that. And I should have looked this up. I believe it was accurate at one point, but isn't the world's population, whites are really the minority?
Oh, without a doubt, we're the minority. I mean, look, we occupy, and that's this whole idea of world that we have to really understand the difference between world and planet. World is a social construct. The United Nations of the world is a construct of European nations that have now invited others in. But when we start using the world defines us as this, the world defines this as a terrorist, and this, the world is run by less melanated groups from these European regions, of which I include the United States because we're such a colonized place, right? I mean, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have been the colonizers of this construct that we call the world. And we continue to this day.
I ask white folks all the time who try and defend our culture, please show me one geographic area where we showed up, where other people were living, and we actually enhanced the quality of their life when we came. And if we can't do that, then we have to be able to acknowledge something is inherently wrong in our practices. It is not that we were born with this skin that makes us evil. It is something that is based in our practices, and that is something that can be changed, although given the level of, how far they've come with it, it is difficult. At the same time, I think we're reaching this point because things work in a cyclical way, right? The earth spins in a circle. Energy moves in cyclical ways. We're coming to the end of something. You cannot have something based on destruction last forever. That's two concepts don't exist together that way.
Well, aren't we already experiencing the decline of the American empire?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. The issue is what next, right? If it's just a result of trying to continue this pattern of controlling resources, it's still part of that same ideas. And to be fair, the Northern Asian, whether it's China or some of those, is also a more mutated form of the original man, original human. And again, wanting control versus inherently in India more so, and in African nations more so, this level of sharing these resources that are abundant on the planet.
How do you think, I don't know that you address this necessarily in the book, although all 7 steps kind of work toward this goal, But how do you change this abundance, this scarcity mentality into one of abundance when people are because that seems to me the first step, as you said, is not to take a step, but
Right.
I would say that the first step towards your path is to acknowledge our humanity, which you cover in detail in the book. But don't we also have to acknowledge, and maybe this is what scares people the most, that we're living under a system that is fundamentally unsustainable?
Yeah.
And isn't that a hard thing to kind of come to terms with?
I think that is the hardest. I think that is the hardest thing to come to terms with, that we're faced with, is because it's beyond. And I speak on this, the idea of life versus controlling something, right? So, Sean, if I want you to be the best version of yourself, you're the most creative version of yourself, creation and creator, and that is a life-giving thing, right? When we eat, we're creating new cells and all of these things, although not if we eat the American diet, right? But
right.
But we're enhancing our life if we naturally participate in what already works, which is life. But I can't control you and want you to be the best, right? The moment I start to say, Sean, but this is how I want you to do it, now I'm bringing sort of a death-based culture to this. And so to really untangle, when you have been taught from birth that you're the greatest version of human, that you're the moral leaders of the world, and we don't know anything about their other cultures, we're ignorant and arrogant, that is a very difficult thing to dismantle. And so some of this level of control that we don't even understand, that's part of our culture. I talk about Oppenheimer, but we've made these false foods, so much manufactured things that we eat that aren't even really healthy related. It's additives, there's preservatives, there's all these different things that fit into a lifestyle that keep us from being connected to the planet. And that was the other thing that being in this region does, beyond the control or competition level that starts from a scarcity mentality, beyond the lack of health, there's the lack of connection to the earth. We don't have an appreciation. The earth didn't give us everything we needed. So naturally, there's a level of disconnection there. And so also when you're in competition, you think of yourself first, your individualism starts to grow. Now we're disconnected there too. So we have to begin to reconnect with all of these things. And the approaches is what's most important. So what I talked about with Oppenheimer, when he split the atom and he built the bomb, and he has this very powerful quote afterwards, that we've created this evil thing, and yet maybe we shouldn't be asking how things work. But because we're scientists, we must ask how things work. As if other cultures don't want to know how things work. It's not the question, it's the approach. We wanted to know so we can control the atom, like we're playing God in this sense. We're making fake foods and artificial flavors. Why can't we just have strawberries be the flavoring? Why do we need to make artificial strawberry flavor? I mean, it already works. And so playing God makes us more superior. Whereas other cultures want to know how things work so they can be connected to it. They can be a part of it. When they come into into another group, they look around and say, how do I fit in? Instead, we go, how do I make this work for me?
Right.
And that's an inherent approach that we have to get beyond, that in letting go of all of these approaches gives us an opportunity, as you were asking earlier, to have some new mind, some new way, and really an old way, reconnect us to the basic truths of the planet and how it works. And then we can start to grow from there.
Yeah. Last week I interviewed a journalist kind of alluded to in the monologue, who and that episode focused more on the prison system of America and the need for abolition. And it struck me that it's just so depressing to think about the situation that we have created in this country and as a result throughout the world, and see a solution out of this without just things just descending into this mob mentality, this violent mentality, because that's what we're breeding, right? We're breeding violence.
Right.
And I want people to understand violence is not just police killing unarmed citizens. Violence is not, physical acts of violence. Violence includes things like food deserts.
Structuring systems, right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And that's the system that we live under. It's a very violent, denying people health care.
Right.
Profiting off of medicines that especially plant-based medicines. You talk about that in your book as well, about this need to change a molecule, and so you can patent it, and then you own this natural resource effectively. And I mean, there's so much I'm going through my mind from your book that because you cover so much. I mean, I want to go back to the food and nutrition here in just a moment. But I guess my question is, your book is awful optimistic and hopeful, and I just wonder, what are you seeing that's making you optimistic?
Well, I think because I saw a level of humanity. So even, let's say, in this conversation, we talk about, let's say Trump wins and Project 2025 gets full effect. I'm optimistic that one thing white folks are good at is destroying some shit. Excuse me, can I cuss on this?
Yes, you absolutely can.
All right. Right. And so, and I say that not all white folks, but white culture. I think that's the only thing Trump and his cronies could be good at, is tearing this whole thing down. And they're going to have no answer to how to build something that people want to be involved in. None. And so that's one way of getting the change that we need, right? That is, we just tear this whole thing apart and then we figure out how to start over. The other way is a slower, more gradual change, right? It's not happening in the way I want. It's not happening in the way you want all the way, but we're able to still continue the conversation and gradually go through the change. The problem is the system has so much entrenched that there's going to have to be a letting go of so much of it in order to really see the value of humanity. And partly that's happening in this younger generation. We call them lazy. We think they're screwed up, right? They don't want to participate, but laziness is a form of being uninspired. When I talk to college-age students, they are so happy to hear what I have to say about untangling this system and where it began, that I get a lot of attention. I don't believe that they would be lazy if we gave them something to look forward to. If we gave them a feeling that, yes, amongst yourselves, you come into this world with wanting to share, and we create systems that say, no, you shouldn't want to share. You should, right? So they're uninspired. At this point, I'm not inspired anymore. And, so you grow up with two parents that are busting their tail to keep up with the Joneses, and they're arguing and they're, angry and they're complaining. What is inspiring about the life that we've created for these youngsters to want to be a part of and go work hard for, when the rest of us are saying we're all in a slave system? We're being, whether you're right or left, you're using that terminology. Like, there has to be this change, and it can't sustain at this level. So I'm not afraid of what that change is. The only afraid I am is how much we've given control to so few. I've worked at Amazon. It's very hard to get inside those buildings without certain level of technology helping you in, and there's a ton of resources there. So if we do let go of that, what happens to that? Yet at the same time, there's an abundant planet on the earth. And so I don't know how old you are, if you ever watched George Carlin.
Oh, yes, I love George Carlin.
So I felt like when I was watching George Carlin right after I wrote my book, I was like, damn, he already said all of this stuff. I could have just said, watch George Carlin and had a 4-page book. But I say that to say, I remember him saying early on, you think that we need to save the planet? We need to save ourselves. The planet's going to be fine. That already works. And as soon as we can get a grasp on it already working, right? Like maybe it's through cryptocurrencies that we can figure out a way to be more humane with the medium of exchange, because all it is a medium of exchange of energy. We're just using something in between us. All other animal forces, life forces, don't use a medium for exchange to get the things that they need to eat and live and survive and enjoy the planet. We're the only ones. We've complicated things so much. We could have a really enjoyable planet, an enjoyable time, even in some of the corrective measures and starting to learn our own humanity. I just think that, there is that potential to enjoy it. And we just got to get rid of some of the cranky old whiteness of it.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, I want to go back to hunter-gatherer societies that were egalitarian. There was, women shared equal roles as men. That is our human nature. That is how we have existed on this planet. It's been like a second that we've lived under this so-called civilization. And civilization has really made us uncivilized.
Yeah. And when we say equal, it's important for me to understand that equal doesn't mean the same. You and I can be equal, and doesn't mean that your and my hair are going to be the same. You have beautiful hair. I had to shave mine off, right? We can be equal. So even in the men-women thing, like the idea that at one point we've gotten so consumed with this idea of the value of this medium of exchange that somebody would come home and feel like because they were out working, they were more valuable than the people that were taking care of the home and making it so they could come home to something that was clean and the children were cared for, like the family. To separate those things from a valuation standpoint is really new, but also very disconnected from the reality of life. And so, yes, going back to just understanding that there's resources here. Now we have an understanding of all this great technology. We could use the technology rather than to be afraid of it competing with us to take our jobs, to go, oh man, look, I don't have to work so hard and we can go and enjoy the planet. I can get to Africa faster and South Africa, and we could just go and move and share the planet together.
Wouldn't that take some sort of, and I hate to use these words, socialism, because socialism means so many different things to so many different people. But aren't we essentially talking about that kind of a society?
Yeah. So I love how socialism is often defined by the corruption that happened when it happened. Yes. So the corruption is the problem. It's not socialism that's the problem, right? But any of these isms, racism is a system, capitalism is a system. These are systems that are in place. We would have to find the humanity in doing all of that, right? If you're giving the power to somebody that you can't even make a decision for, that's not truly at the basis of what socialism is. But here's the thing about socialism, communism, and capitalism. We'll keep it at those three. Only one of them is not human-centric. Social has to do with social interactions. Commune has to do with community. Capital says the first thing on my mind needs to be about money and not about human nature and humanity. So on the other two, there's a human interaction.
Absolutely.
On capital, it's creating something that's in between me and you, in my decision making, first I have to make sure I get this capital. Then I can worry about whether Sean ate his breakfast this morning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Why does that scare people so much?
Because we are taught that there's so much power. So I remember, I don't know if you follow basketball at all. It's the only sport I still follow for my sense of getting away from the world. But Steven Adams was is a basketball player from New Zealand. And when the pandemic took place, New Zealand had a very tight knit. Hey, you can't come in. You're going to be, at the border. If you come into our country, you're going to, get a lot of testing. And there was like all of these things that we were told were so horrible and so controlling. And when asked about that, he said, but our government has our trust. See, we built a government based on lies. So we don't believe, like you just finished reading, we don't believe that these people have the best interest of us at heart. And now it's built on serving who the donors are.
Yes.
So
yes.
If we can't trust our government, then when you start to hear about socialism, oh my God, more power for the government that you can't trust. It's the trust issue. It's the corruption issue. It's the lack of humanity issue. It's not socialism. We have to define and build structures based on social interactions. But we're so afraid of these things because we're basing it on this lack of trusting system that we have. Why are we giving trust to a soulless a soulless person, not human? The person, the legal term of what we are, we're thinking that that's going to save us because that gives us this level of freedom. And I want to mention how much freedom, when we talk about our freedoms, how much of a lack of responsibility comes with what we define as our freedoms. I want the freedom to eat whatever I want to eat. Well, if you get sick, somebody else is going to have to take care of you and be bothered by that. So we're all connected. So there should be a level of government or even the corporations that are giving us the food responsibility that they're giving us something that's going to enhance our life, because food has the ability to enhance the quality of our life. We shouldn't have the choice of harming ourselves versus healing ourselves with our food. That shouldn't be our choices. Not in a society that's trusting and loving and sharing and caring, right?
I do love my processed sugar, though.
You do. I know. Of course, you've been hooked on it. We've done a good job of hooking you on it.
Yes.
I guarantee you, though, after we let that go and work you through something, you can still have plenty of sweets in a all-natural world.
How difficult, though, is that now that we have destroyed so much of the planet? Is that it's self-sustainable at this point?
I do worry about that, but again, the planet has itself ways of correcting itself. Like a friend of mine doesn't eat peanuts because he knows peanuts have been known for absorbing toxins out of the soil. That's one of the ways that they were originally used. So if we want to refurbish the soil, there is a chance to do so. It will take time. But look at how much of our farming goes into feeding the meat industry at a level that's not even healthy for the meat. So we're eating unhealthy meat when we could just use all of these crops that are just soy and corn to grow cauliflower and asparagus and zucchini and apples and plums and things that we're going to all enjoy. Excuse me.
Yeah, we would gain the equivalent of the African continent.
Yeah.
If we reverted to plant-based diets.
Yeah.
And a lot of land.
I don't even want it because I know everybody will get defensive. I'm taking away their meats and whatnot. Even if we went to an all-natural diet, like the meats you're eating, you should be concerned about how they are fed, the just the nature of it. But I was just talking actually earlier today about a conversation I had a while ago. I was just angry one morning because my plum doesn't even taste like it used to as a child. It used to be full of so much flavor and whatnot. McDonald's used to have French fries that were made of potatoes. Like the idea of where we are right now compared to where we were in a short period of time means that we can reverse this. And I also think about Neil deGrasse Tyson talked about how, we've done, it's so funny that we've done all this destructive things here. And what do white folks want to do? Oh, let's go see if Mars can work for us. Because we found something that says we might be able to make life out of there. Well, we already know life can be made out of here. Why don't we just make this life?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't even understand how what we're talking about has become so controversial, at least in this country. I mean, everything is between the right and the left. And again, those terms mean pretty much nothing. But
it just means we're in a competition.
Yes, that's exactly it. And I just realized as I was talking, the point you just made. Of course we're divided because that is the intent of the system, isn't it?
Of course. If you need to bring over some marbles to my house, a bag of marbles, you're not going to, and you want to get here quickly, you're going to keep them in the bag together. If you throw them on the floor, you now got to spend all this time trying to capture these marbles and get them all together. And some of them roll under this and, and you're trying to hold them in your hand and they fall out. And that you can't move as fast when it's divided. But you can be controlled that way when we're divided. A lot more impact because we only see ourselves as not being able to have an impact. Yet when we have a culture of togetherness, it's a lot easier to have a much better, greater impact.
Yeah, and that's why one of the things that I value about being on the left is, I don't look at Trump supporters as enemies.
Yeah.
I look at them as, okay, I've got more in common with them than I do the billionaires that are in charge of this country.
Yes.
And we need to build bridges and talk to people. We're not even doing that anymore. And so many of my friends on the left, if they come across a conservative on social media, they'll just block a person.
Right.
And that person is an evil person.
Yeah.
And of course, the right has the same mentality a lot of times.
Yeah, for sure. Cancel culture. They love to right loves to say cancel culture is only on the left, but it's on both sides. We're canceling books and we don't want to talk to liberals, and we got bad. We even make their titles bad names. Oh, that's a liberal and this, that, and the other, right? But at the same time, if I needed $100, I know that there are people on the right and the left that if they had it to give, they would give it to me. If I needed a help with fixing a flat tire, I know that there are humans on the right and on the left that would help me with my tire. I know that there are humans on the right and the left that would give me a ride somewhere. And that's the basic interaction that we have to come back to understand we're not that different.
Right. Yeah, again, it goes back to we are all human beings deserving of dignity, equality, and equity.
Yeah.
And even the idea of equality has become politically divisive. It's just amazing to me that we've come so far down.
The power to define is unbelievable. It's got a grip on us. And it's hard. That is one of the most challenging things to get because when we're speaking languages to each other, they're really just sounds until we put a definition to them. And if my definition of equality is different from yours, and you hear something different, and you hear equality is taking away what I have, and I'm hearing equality is really sharing and opening up and getting out of the way and allowing space to be occupied by others as well. This idea of what's mine versus ours,
yeah.
or the planets or whatever, this idea of ownership of things has us so protective of our own. You have to do for you first. Put your oxygen mask on first. There's context to that conversation that we remove. It's only in the state of an emergency do you have to do that.
Right.
Otherwise, we're not in an emergency. Stop putting the oxygen mask on you when you have more rooms in your house than you need, and when you got access to all of the things that you need and others don't. You don't need any more oxygen. You're good. We can share this place.
Yeah, and I want to go back to your book for a moment. You experienced firsthand, and again, I acknowledge that you're a white person, and you acknowledge that you had white privilege in these situations.
Yeah.
But that doesn't change the fact that you experienced the police brutality and the injustices that Black people experience, especially young people, on a daily basis. And could you speak to that, some of those experiences that you mentioned in your book where you encountered the way the police even treated you differently because you were with Black friends?
Sure. So it started early on. I didn't realize that I was not trained in the same way that Black families had to train their children how to behave around police, what the police's motives were. I remember walking home many of nights from a mall that was a 2-mile walk from my house, and yet it was going through a very affluent area. It's actually the area both of my parents grew up in, but to get to the area where I grew up in University City, we had to walk through Clayton, and Clayton police would often stop us. And I remember the first time when they held us for about 20 minutes, telling us there was a break-in in somebody's home, and they were just looking for the suspects. And if and I'm not putting together, we're kids, we don't have any, we're walking, we don't have anything, we're not holding anything. This doesn't even make sense that you would stop us. And they're just, where are you coming from? What are you doing? Where are you going? But they're constantly using this. There was a break-in, so we're going to hold you until we find out where, and I finally got tired and broke down and said, well, maybe we can help you. And my friends went, no, we can't. And they said, oh, if you can help us, then you must know what happened. And if you know what happened, then you were involved. And I went, oh, shoot, boy, did I open my mouth in the wrong way. Right. And on the way home, my friends had to give me the lecture. No, these are not our friends. Whatever you've been taught about the police, that is not how this thing works here. And so I got the talk, right, from my 12-year-old, 13-year-old friends at the same time that, that they had already gotten the talk about what to do with the police. And so I was stopped when I was driving. My friends got to drive my father's car before I did because they were older than me. And we would be stopped at night and they would say, where are you going? And we'd be like, what did you pull us over for? And they say, well, what are you doing out this late? Well, we're still old enough we can be out this late. Well, what are you doing? Well, why are you doing this? Whose car is this? And I get frustrated and I start going off and yelling. And they're like, shut up. You can get away with this. We're going to get in trouble. And I can remember them locking friends up for having traffic ticket warrants because of my big mouth going, hey, screw you. You're not being right and fair and just and all of this. And, they would call my father and wake him up in the middle of the night. Sir, we just want to make sure, your car is out. Well, did I call the police? Because yes, I did. I was actually asleep. I know who has my car. I know who's driving my car. Would you leave me alone and leave them alone? And, and it would be unbelievable how much I could get away with talking to them and how much they still took it out on my friends. I can remember dropping my friends off at work and police just seeing them get out of the car and then rolling up on me and going, "You need to get different friends." Who are you to tell me I need to get different friends? What was that all about? They just went into a factory, we're 19, 20, 21 years old. Why are you telling me this? So all of these things just continued to spurn my quest to find out, why would people even feel like comfortable doing this? Why would they see some child with a different hairstyle and go, they're bad, they're dirty, they're this? Why? What makes you think that off the top? What makes you come to that conclusion before you even got to know somebody?
Yeah. Did you ever have any positive encounters with the police?
Oh, sure. I mean, so why police needs to be done by people in the neighborhood is very important.
Yes.
Right. So there was plenty of times there was some stop signs around where I grew up that probably weren't as important as the other stop signs were. And so, especially late at night, you could see every angle. There's nobody going to be stopping at this stop sign that's only for a walk from a park. We can just ride on through it. And so we would get stopped by the police, and the police would be, telling my best friend, "Hey, Shondo, you got a warrant. You need to be taken care of. Don't get caught up over something stupid like that. Hey, JD, don't do that anymore. Stop with that." And these were people that had seen us grow up through high school, knew Shondo played on the basketball team, knew they played at the park all the time. I played in the tennis courts in the parks all the time. The knowledge of having them in our neighborhood and being aware makes it a big difference. Hey, guys, stop that before it gets to be a problem. That's protecting and serving too. Yeah. Don't go, hey, fellas, don't do that. We don't need that here. You guys don't need to do that. Hey, take that weed, throw it out, get rid of it. We're not going to bust you for it, but you're not supposed to have that. That's against the law. That's a much different way of handling things.
Yeah, I mean, community policing is all about community policing.
Right.
And go ahead.
Community protecting and serving, even beyond policing, because the term police has the connotation of keeping Black folks in line. That's what it was started to do from going back to the slavery days. It's used often as a way of just controlling a situation, but protecting and serving actually sounds much more humanitarian anyway. And that's where we need to get back into. And I talk about, what if, I don't know where you are, if potholes are a big thing in your streets, but boy, I have had more problems with my cars and hitting, one, I'm short, so I'm not always able to see what's in front of me over my car as much, but hitting a pothole can cause so much frustration and damage. And imagine you're on your way to work and you hit a pothole and now you're late and you're being dinged, if not fired for this. Like, so much can go on because things are connected and not isolated. What if the police drove around? They drive around the most. What if they noticed a pothole and put a cone there so we all knew there was a pothole, and then immediately we went to fix it? Like, that's a humanitarian type of lifestyle that's not that difficult to do. And police still have their job, and they actually are protecting and serving. But we don't think of that as that. We don't conceptualize life in that manner. And that's the shift in paradigm that really needs to happen. And it's going to take some letting go of some of the ideas that we have.
Yeah. No, and you talk a bit in the book too about the fact that we are unwell as a society. We are unhealthy physically and mentally as a society because we have that very mindset that you just described.
Right. It's stressful.
Yeah, exactly. Stress. It's not at all natural what we're experiencing. We're not experiencing the natural world. We're not experiencing human nature. And you talk about the level of mental illness that it would take to violently exploit people.
Right.
And isn't that kind of giving an excuse to the oppressors?
Well, that's why I'm saying we need to go back and hug ourselves. At this point, yes, it's so built into our nature, right? But we have enough information to know and access to enough information. That's also why I like the younger generation and I have hope for them. The internet has given younger generation access to information that myself growing up until I became a young adult did not have access to information other than education and media, right? So, and conversation with people in the community. So the level of information now, yes, absolutely. The systems were designed without love in mind. And I'm going to say that one more time. The systems were designed without love in mind. And what I mean by that is when, let's go back to that pothole situation. Sean, you're driving to work, you hit a pothole, and you end up having so much problems with your car, but yet this job is barely paying the bills. And now you lose your job because they already didn't like you at work and you lose your job because of this. You can't be relied upon. Well, now you're going to be punished. Your credit goes bad. It's harder for, but you're told you just have to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and carry on. But a loving system would say, hey, Sean, it's terrible that that's happened. Here's how to support you so that you can continue being a contributing part of our society. We love to think that, oh, no, it's the competitive nature that makes us strive to be the best. No, it doesn't. It does for some, but it also makes a lot of us tired and worn out and not wanting to participate. And it's uninspiring for so many. Yet a loving system would be also very inspiring because, instead of making it hard for you to catch back up, we make it easy and we support you for catching back up with your life. You're inspired to go on and continue to do your best version of yourself. We think that taking advantage of the system and this laziness is what we'd be supporting. It's a reflection of the system of harm. A reflection of a system of love would be inspiring. But we don't have that level of understanding. We don't have any participation in such systems that demonstrate that for us so we can even see an example of it. So all we know is this is human nature. It's human nature to want to control others and dominate and this, that, and the other. No, it's not. It's our nature and our culture. It's not human nature. There was a social engineer that developed a project called the Venus Project. And he spoke about, we say that, lying and cheating and deception and all these things are human nature. It's nature to be competitive and all these things. It's also human nature to be caring and sharing and loving and supporting and that would be human nature too. But we didn't build our systems around that. We built our systems around this other competitive nature, this racism, this capitalism, capitalism isn't even the market system. Even there's an exchange of humanity in the market system as it was originally thought of. It was not meant for Walmart to have stores in every city. It was meant for local people to have stores in their city. It wasn't, so like we can redefine this in a way of human interaction, but it's going to take coming together and letting go. And that is, a process that they have a strong grip hold of. The problem is that they have a destructive process. And so at some point it's weakening itself and it will fall over if it's not destroyed. My biggest concern is how much destruction the powers to be who are fighting for who's the wealthiest and who's the greatest and who's, got the greatest economy, as far as a nation goes, how much are they willing to destroy because they can't control something that's really enjoyable for us all?
You to that point, and I did not know this before reading your book. And let me pull up the exact quote from the book here. I've got it here somewhere. Okay, here it is. You say, we are not told by the media about how the American Journal of Public Health published in 2004 a report based on a study of 10 years from 1991 to 2000 of over 1 million black folks that died essentially because of their blackness and the conditions that the majority are forced to live in. That's hard to read.
Yeah. So that's a quote from a Tim Wise speech, and he talked about that. And that goes to the deceptive practices of it's not what we're taught, it's what we're not taught that's really tricking us and creating the illusion and being used to do so. Why wouldn't we be taught about that?
Yeah, why wouldn't that be news? I mean,
right.
Compared to the COVID deaths.
Right.
I mean, this is not insignificant whatsoever. Why wouldn't it be on the news? Why wouldn't we have heard about this?
Exactly. Because the system is the one telling us about it, right? I mean, it was just today that I saw a black man talking about forming his own version of Twitter so that there's a voice there, because so much is controlled by an algorithm, and we can blame it on the algorithm, but somebody had to design the algorithms to work that way. So again, it goes back to the approach. Yes. If we use the technology to really enhance our lives, we can, but that has to come from an approach that is much more loving and caring and sharing than a love and supporting than one that is about dominating and controlling and manipulating and all of those things. It's an approach problem, and that's where we're at. And if we can get more and more people to recognize the approach is the problem, that the scarcity approach and the difference, and I have a whole list of the differences in approaches, and I go through some of them in my book, but of, basic, even like time. We have a new year in the middle of the winter. Doesn't make sense. The earth tells us when the new year is. Right. For us in the northern region, it's it's in the springtime. For in the southern region, their springtime starts when our fall starts. Like, the earth gives new life at this time. That should be the new year. It's simple. Let's just be a part of that. Why are we trying to tell the earth what our societies when the new year is? It's a different approach when you're trying to control something versus just be a part of something.
I'm looking for another quote that I want, and I've read I got to reread this book again, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. But he basically describes the very system that you're talking about. And the quote from your book is, the International Monetary Fund, which is the IMF, and World Bank are created by Europe and the US for the benefit of our international corporations. And he goes on to describe how he would act as an economic hitman to create plans for countries to take loans for developing their roads and electrical grids. The plans falsely show how the country could develop its infrastructure and grow its wealth. When the countries are unable to repay these loans, which is by design, they're either forced to give the U.S. military space to build a base or give colonizers the control of natural resources of these lands. Again, it's been a long time since I've read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, so I really got to go back and read that again because it was a great book. And I'm so glad that you quoted it here. And these people, they know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing.
They know that the harm that they're creating, they're not ignorant of the harm that they're creating through these systems and these exploitative practices. And yet these people are essentially our rulers. How do we basically overthrow these people?
It really takes a lot of letting that go. And so I don't have the exact answer. I don't want to pretend that I'm the knower of all of that. It can be done more slowly by generating more and more community efforts to do so. We have to get the components of a system, of a societal, of a social network together, right? We have to get together the education side. We have to get together the resources that we need. We have to get these things together. And there's countries that have plenty of space and that this can be done.
Absolutely.
White folks can't lead it this time, though. And I say that with all the intentions of understanding that I have greatness within me, you have greatness within you. We have to learn the value of supporting and sharing and serving one another at a level till we can fully experience it, so that we can learn a new way, an intentional way of doing so. And part of our intention and part of the real change of whiteness is to move us out of a position of white savior, or it's my problem, we caused it, we need to know. If we caused it, it's the same mind. So when you go into rehab, they don't allow you to go out on your own after that. They say your mind got you here. What you need is somebody to help guide you through some of the next steps so you can start to see something different. And that's what we need to lead on. We need to really start to take our economic power of buying. This level of convenience is something we have to get over as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so all of this, the resources are here. It's going to take some other social genius to recognize, because I love it how they say, oh, cryptocurrencies are based on nothing. There's no value there. Our money isn't based on anything other than the fact that we have a military that'll come and destroy you if you don't take our money and say it's valuable. So we're not this gaslighting that's so natural in our society is something we have to overcome. But if we can just start to let go, and that's what the process is, and really value others, and even the process of repairing and reparations from a humanitarian standpoint, experiencing that from our standpoint. It's not just writing a check, it's changing the way we approach each other. It's going through the healing process. It's allowing someone to cuss us out because we're not helping them right. And we show up again and say, okay, you got that out of your system. How do we help you now? How do we do for you? Okay, what can I do? These are my talents. How can I serve you? At some point, if we don't, then we're going to have to pay for passing the catch up to us, because where do we draw the line as to what's an actual service we can do for each other without charging, and what service has to be paid for? We have to let go of these systems and start to really see life. And that's going to come back to just taking the essence. The earth provides us with what we need. And now we need to start to see how we're going to share and distribute that differently, so that we're not controlling it. And it's going to take us white folks really learning the value of servitude and revaluing that. In my book, I talk about who's more important, the nurse or the executive in the office, right? Like the nurse is more valuable, but the executive in the office and the system is much more valuable because that's what we pay. They didn't do anything of value. That we have a whole New York blocks and blocks of Wall Street that are just playing around with money and maneuvering digits. There's no value to the life on the planet from that. It's a bunch of
except what they extract from it,
right?
Which is again part of this whole white supremacist mindset. I mean, where are we stealing the most resources?
Right.
Well, I would even argue that we're stealing our own resources. And when we talk about oppression, I often tell people, they're like, if Donald Trump gets reelected, we're going to have fascism. And I like to tell people, you already have fascism. Yeah. It's built into the system that we have.
Right.
The only difference between, is really symbolic. That's the difference between Donald Trump and, the fascism that we have is it's going to be more symbolic, and we're going to see more cultural divisions. Right. Not that that's I definitely want to avoid that.
Right.
Right. I'm not saying, so what if Trump wins and all of this happens? I mean, that's going to be a nightmare for sure. And it's going to hurt a lot of people, especially the people that we're talking about here on this show today. But we already have fascism. And it's getting people to recognize that I have the biggest struggles.
Right. So I think one of the things you just said is important. Healing, intentional healing an injury, it also involves pain, right? If you tear the ligaments, you're in pain. So we're in this fascist system. We're in this system of oppression. We're in pain. When we go through the healing process, it's going to be painful, even as intentional as we are, letting go of some of these things that we've hold true to, that Amazon will deliver my packages and
today
supporting mom and pop businesses. It's going to cost more. I can't afford. It's going to be pain involved in this. So it's not without pain, but it's also a much better, if I don't heal this torn knee, then my other leg is going to start to be deformed, and my back is going to start, and all of these other pieces of my body are going to be hurt. And we're not going to heal proper. And even though we can never heal that leg exactly to how it was, it's going to be much better than just letting it go. And, oh, well, it's been 2 years, that knee should be fine. No, it's not fine, because we never intentionally went and healed it. And the more we wait on that knee healing, the more time it's going to be harmed, and it's going to take even more time. And that's where we are with this reparations thing. Healing is going to take some pain. It's even going to take some setbacks, right? Sometimes you're going through the rehabilitation process and you're stretching your muscles. And when we build our muscles up, there's pain involved in that. So we can't be afraid of the pain of the change towards something that we really want, because the healing is so important for us. It's such an important step for us to go through, and recognizing that even in the setbacks, we're going to make mistakes. I didn't realize that's not how you wanted me to say that. I didn't realize that's not where you wanted this to go. I did bring my white culture into this. I'm sorry. I need to take a step back. Thank you for cussing me out and letting me know. And hopefully you'll allow me to come and show that I know I can learn my lessons. And so we can heal. And it's going to take some discomfort and pain and all of that. And yet we can also be a part of something great in the process.
Absolutely. And as you point in the book, I found the next quote, which is a perfect segue into this. You say, creating white supremacy culture is hurtful to ourselves, because to maintain it, we must spend so much time and energy trying to suppress others rather than being our best selves.
Mm-hmm.
Perfectly said.
Positioning ourselves, right? When you're winning something, there's two ways to try and do so. One is just focus on your being the best version of yourself. And a lot of times it's also like, what can I do to stop them from doing things? And like when we talk about differences, we're so used to this bipolarism of zero-sum game that it's left versus right. Well, that's on the same line. But there's a sphere of directions we could go in, and yet we're not taking any of those, because the moment we even hear something different and we go, that's in opposition of me. Right. No, it's not. It's just, it's different, right? And so all of this, we're so constructed to position ourselves to win the competition that we don't even see that we're stopping ourselves from being the best version of ourselves.
Yeah, I see that we're unfortunately running out of time, so I want to plug your book again. Can we put the Matt? Can we put up the book cover? There we go. Race for What? A White Man's Journey and Guide to Healing Racism from Within. JD Mass. JD, where can people find the book?
You can go to raceforwhat.com, and there's links to many of the places it's sold. Unfortunately, it is sold on many of our capitalistic platforms, but get the book. You can buy it directly from raceforwhat.com, as well as from any of the places online that books are typically sold on.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you'll come back, because there's so much more.
I would love to. I was hoping you would invite me back.
Yes, I'd love to have. And I want to also talk about your podcast. Same Difference Life is where they can find the podcast, correct?
Yes.
And
Same Difference Life. Real quickly, it's about a Black man that grew up in Iowa amongst white peers and friends, and me growing up amongst my Black peers and friends, and us getting to know each other. We purposely don't ask about our histories, and we story tell about getting to know each other throughout our life, live on the broadcast.
That sounds like an excellent podcast for Citizens.am. Just as a
talk to you all about what you guys do there.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. That's it for this week. Matt, give me a thumbs up. We're off next week, right? Yeah, we are off next week, and I think for the week after that as well. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, JD. Thank you all for tuning in. And again, if you're watching this live, go ahead and like the stream, share it. It's available on all major platforms.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Matt. You.
Stay tuned, because Citizens Talk Radio will be right back with